Great Demon King. Chapter 26. Entering a Demonic Mental State. As Claude neared him, Shuo grimaced and let out a low moan, ducking his torso and lowering his head while reaching for his ankle, as though checking on a fresh injury. He moved in such a way that Claude would only see the top of his head and none of his face, hoping to avoid recognition. Next to him, Cal couldn't help but frown at this sudden display. He steadied Shuo's bent body with one hand, concern etched on his features. "Are you all right?" he asked, voice lowered. "Did you hurt your ankle? Let me take a look." He tried to peer down at Shuo's foot, sensing that something was off yet unsure what it could be. "It's nothing much," Shuo replied quietly, keeping his head bowed and shoulders hunched. "I just twisted it a little low." There was a trace of discomfort in his voice, though whether from real pain or anxiety about Claude's proximity was hard to tell. Claude and the other night students arrived at that moment, chatting in vibrant tones, their boots echoing on the stone walkway. Several bore shallow cuts, bruises, or scrapes from earlier practice sessions. They were used to seeing injured individuals around these training fields, so the sight of another person nursing an ankle didn't raise suspicions. Claude, in particular, cast only a bored, cursory glance at Shuo, and then kept on talking and laughing with his peers. He was in the middle of a story, apparently with no recollection of the time he had nearly killed Shuo with a burst of fighting aura. Shuo breathed an inward sigh of relief as Claude passed by without a flicker of recognition. If Claude had taken a moment to look more closely, he might well have noticed something familiar in Shuo's figure, or in the set of his shoulders. But as luck would have it, the tall knight was focused on his companions, gesturing with confident ease as he strode away. Shuo's ankle, however, really was injured. It had gotten twisted badly enough to swell. Cal spotted the swelling and sucked in a sharp breath. "It's pretty swollen. We should get that looked at." "Let me help you back," he suggested, voice softening. He presumed Shuo would be limping the entire way. Yet the moment Claude's footsteps receded into the distance, Shuo straightened up and tested his injured foot, rotating the joint gingerly a few times before flashing Cal a small smile. "I suddenly feel much better," he said, making an effort to sound casual. "No worries about taking me back. Thanks for helping me, though." He then quickened his pace, leaving Cal all but speechless. Shuo's departure was so swift and seemingly painless that it contradicted the obvious swelling around his ankle. Cal stood there, utterly perplexed, his eyebrows knitted. "What a weird person," he muttered, shaking his head. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the last streaks of gold gave way to dusky purple, Shuo limped into the necromancy section of the School of Magic. His body was one giant ache, battered from top to bottom by the ruthless spar with Lawrence. Yet, thanks to Borg and Carrie taking over his usual errands, he didn't need to perform any taxing chores for the time being. After lining up for a quick dinner and forcing down some bland food, he headed straight for the small warehouse where he slept. Locking the door firmly behind him, he exhaled, knowing he finally had a space in which to cultivate his magical yuan without fear of interruption. He began by sitting on the floor, crossing his legs, and breathing deeply to steady his mind. The bruises and strains from his fierce clash with Lawrence remained vivid across his skin, and the throbbing in his muscles was unrelenting. Still, he coaxed himself past the discomfort and started the familiar process of channeling magical yuan. Each cycle of energy coursed through him, targeting damaged tissues and hastening their repair. The initial, searing pain in his limbs and torso subsided incrementally each time the magical yuan completed its loop, turning the fiery, debilitating ache into something manageable. Gradually, Shuo sensed that his magical yuan itself felt denser than before, as though all the strain and suffering had actually nurtured its growth. This discovery both gratified and surprised him. The effort he had spent pushing his body near its limits, whether through direct blows or through healing, was evidently strengthening the magical yuan, expanding its capacity and power. He recalled the lessons of his demonic cultivation, which stressed that for the practitioner to grow stronger, the body and spirit must experience breaking, then rebuild more durable than before. Pain, therefore, was not an enemy but a catalyst, forging new heights of resilience. "I'll have to keep doing this," he told himself in a hushed voice. "That's the only way I'll transform faster." By the time midnight approached, the persistent ache in his bones and muscles had faded to an echo of its original torment. Feeling that he could accomplish more before dawn, he transitioned to practicing the mystical glacial spellfire technique, directing the flow of magical yuan to his fingertips and palms, in strict accordance with the method's detailed instructions. Steadying his breathing, he visualized cold energy gathering in one hand and hot energy in the other. His palms began to tingle with an odd mix of frosty numbness and scorching heat, almost as if he were gripping a piece of ice in one hand and a coal in the other. He concentrated fiercely, weaving these contrary forces through his meridians, pushing them to each boundary of his hands and fingers. Time lost its usual meaning. He no longer noticed the quiet outside the warehouse or the darkness pressing against the single dusty window. He forgot his injuries, forgot the precarious danger he had been in with Claude, and forgot even the recent memories of Lawrence's brutal kicks. All that remained was pure focus on his inner energy, as though he had slipped into a private realm beyond physical constraints. Shuo had often forced himself to stop practicing at a certain hour, either out of habit or caution, making sure he was present for errands the next day. But tonight, he allowed himself to sink fully into his practice, unmoored from daily concerns. That was how he unknowingly entered a wondrous, empty-headed meditative state, one that Chu Kanglan's memories hinted could be an enormous boon to demonic cultivators. It might have continued indefinitely if not for a sudden loud bang on the door. The shocking noise jarred him violently from his trance. He opened his eyes, feeling an intense wave of awareness flooding him. His gaze snapped to the doorway, the stare cold and piercing like a blade. Standing there was Jack, his face shadowed by worry. Upon meeting Han Shuo's razor-sharp glare, Jack jolted and instinctively cowered, only releasing a soft breath when the iciness in Han Shuo's eyes receded. "Brian," he said in a trembling tone, "you're here after all. You hadn't come out for days, and I was worried something terrible might have happened." Snapped abruptly out of his profound meditation, Han Shuo took a moment to check the state of his body. Astonishingly, his previously raw, brutalized self felt nearly whole again. He recognized the sensation of the magical yuan circulating smoothly at a slightly higher capacity than before. Additionally, his mind felt unexpectedly clear, as though a fog had lifted it. "What could have happened to me?" he asked, stretching his stiff limbs with a series of cracking pops. "I just slept in a bit. Since Borg and Carrie are taking over my chores, there's nothing urgent for me to do." As if to highlight his nonchalance, he rolled his neck, eliciting a string of crisp pops that made Jack's eyes widen. When Han Shuo stood and reached for the low wooden bed behind him, his entire skeleton gave off multiple sharp pa noises in succession. The sound was so startling that Jack froze in place, hardly able to believe that any human body could make such sounds without crumpling in agony. Moments passed before Jack found his voice again. Even then, it came out in a squeak. "Brian, I've been knocking on your door for 6 days," he said, eyes still glued to Han Shuo. "You didn't come out to eat or anything. I thought maybe something awful had happened." "This 6 days," Han Shuo repeated, brows furrowing in shock. He had assumed a day or two at most, but 6, that was more than double his guess. He then recalled Chu Kanglan's teachings about a demonic mental state, a phenomenon that could overtake a practitioner under rare fortuitous circumstances. Demonic mental states could manifest in 2 broad types. The aggressive version occurred when a cultivator's rational mind collapsed from severe provocation, driving them into a bloodthirsty rampage. In that state, pain ceased to register, and the cultivator would slaughter relentlessly until their body could no longer hold out, incurring enormous side effects if they somehow survived. Han Shuo, by stark contrast, had experienced the passive version, entering a gentle, dreamlike trance during training that caused him to lose track of time, while greatly amplifying his magic and physical restoration. Awaking from that peaceful, fog-like state typically meant emerging stronger, with minimal drawbacks. That explained why he felt so revitalized, why the injuries that should have taken many more days of recovery were all but mended, and why his magical yuan felt more robust. "I guess I slept more deeply than I thought," he said with a casual shrug, not wanting to delve into details with Jacko. "Anyway, you said you needed something." Jack, still wearing a bewildered look, retrieved a large piece of bread and handed it over. "Take this, you must be starving. Also, Master Fanny told me to track you down. She wants to see you at her lab, and Lisa was looking for you too, though I'm not sure if that's good or bad." Han Shuo tore into the bread hungrily, relieved to have something to eat after 6 days in a trance. He nodded thoughtfully as he chewed. "All right, I'll head there now. Let's go." Before leaving, he made sure to glance briefly under the bed. The little skeleton he normally hid there was still lying motionless, concealed from prying eyes. During his deep meditation, he had feared something might have disturbed it, but it looked fine. Relocking the door after Jack's sudden entrance, Han Shuo departed, trailing Jack through the corridors toward Fanny's laboratory. He knocked 3 times upon reaching her door, his knuckles rapping lightly on the wood. "Come in," came Fanny's gentle voice, slightly muffled by the thick door. Shuo turned the knob and entered, noting the mild yet palpable magical aura that flooded the air inside. He immediately spotted several magic scrolls arranged in neat rows on a central pedestal. Each scroll bore swirling symbols and mysterious diagrams brimming with necromantic power. Even a newcomer like Shuo could sense the raw energy emanating from them, as if these relics of arcane knowledge carried the faint echoes of another realm. Bent over one of the scrolls, Fanny was in mid-incantation, her posture elegant and focused. She wore thin gloves to protect her hands, though one elongated fingernail dipped into a small dish of brownish solution. With fluid motions, she traced an intricate rune onto the parchment. The lines seemed random at first, but quickly coalesced into a pattern that exuded a sense of somber harmony. When she finished the incantation, Fanny pressed her other hand softly against the scroll, releasing a trickle of mana into its surface. A lonely darkness swirled around it, and the scroll itself glowed faintly, then rolled up in a smooth automatic movement, indicating the spell was now sealed and complete. "Brian," she said, looking up with an appreciative curve to her lips. "How have you been? How's your back feeling these days?" "Thank you for asking, Master Fanny," he replied with a respectful nod. "My back is fully healed." He had come to realize that continuing to pretend to be the old, witless Brian might attract the wrong sort of attention. The time had come to allow others to see him as more than just a simpleton. As long as he did it gradually, most would assume he had either matured or recovered from past trauma. This transformation could pave the way for bigger, bolder moves. The memory of the old Brian, so easily bullied and harassed, rose in his mind. He recalled how he had sworn vengeance on those who'd wronged him. He had dealt with Borg, Carrie, Bach, and Lisa to an extent, returning a measure of Brian's former suffering onto them. Yet he remained in the necromancy major partly because it was an ideal place to improve his magic, and partly to further his future plans, all while taking advantage of the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force's extensive resources. He would continue learning everything he could, both about magic and about this vast new world. "Oh, that's excellent news," Fanny said, gently setting the completed scroll onto a stack of similar ones. She turned toward him, brushing a stray wisp of hair aside. "I'm taking some students on a field trip very soon. They'll be putting their necromancy spells to practical use outside the academy walls. It'll be a chance to see how they fare in real-world situations. I was thinking you might like to come along. You could assist with carrying items, cleaning up, and so forth. I'd also be able to keep an eye on you, just in case your back starts giving you trouble again." Shuo paused, reflecting on how big an opportunity this might be. Leaving the academy grounds meant encountering new environments, possibly dangerous ones, where a person's strength, cunning, and adaptability would be put to the test. It sounded like the perfect scenario to continue tempering his body and refining his magical abilities. "All right," he said after a moment, nodding once. "I'm in." Fanny's lips curved into a bright approving smile. "That's wonderful, Brian. Make sure to pack whatever you need. Extra food, clothing, any potions you might want. We'll probably be gone for a few days." Shuo nodded again and gave her a polite bow. Inside, an undercurrent of excitement zipped through him. He was more than ready to leave the academy's safe confines and face real challenges. If anything, each hardship would only spur further progress in his dual cultivation paths. Though he appeared outwardly calm, he was already planning where to store the little skeleton, how to maintain his daily practice of demonic magic while on the road, and how to keep pushing himself toward another breakthrough. He'd not soon forget the sensation of that demonic mental state and how it had accelerated his healing and development. In the meantime, he would let everyone in the necromancy major see that the crazy Brian had finally changed for the better, slowly, steadily, proving himself capable without attracting too much suspicion. He allowed himself a small smile. "Yes," he repeated softly, "I'll make sure I'm prepared." And with that decision, a new phase of his journey was about to begin.